Hello YouTube and welcome back to World of Warships with Wadres, and today's video I'm really just kind of going to be playing around and just kind of wanting to talk about World of Warships for a little bit in regards to some of the concerns that I have had recently, and in some ways they've kind of been brought to light by a couple of the other more notable, I guess I could say, community contributors, especially NoZoup for you, who I do not normally agree with, I might add. And granted, these are concerns that I didn't really recognize until after he kind of brought them into the light, but the more I thought about them, the more they do kind of resonate and make sense. And one of the things that he was mentioning to start with is just the sheer amount of high-tier premiums that are being introduced to the game, among other things. And it's just, it's like the game is being flooded with high-tier premiums. And the only thing I can think of in this regard, and this also comes in a way to the playability of the game as well, is just the sheer number of players who are going and just buying some of these high-tier ships from, say, the premium shop or whatever, and they may not necessarily have more than a few battles where maybe their highest advance is like tier 4 or tier 5, and now suddenly they're in a tier 9 premium ship at, say, a battleship or tier 9 cruiser, what have you. And I'm sorry to say it, at the high tiers, the way the ships perform, the way they handle, the way the armor, everything operates is almost fundamentally different by comparison to a lot of the tier, say, 3, tier 4, tier 5 ships. The way they interact with each other is so very different. And Zoop was going on specifically talking about how we are just being inundated with these very expensive, and in some cases not even historical, just design ships at tier 9, 8, and 10, and that's resources that could be used in putting out, say, more historical ships at the mid-tiers. And I do kind of have to agree with this. I can definitely believe that there are a lot more ships that actually did exist, that were actually built and manufactured by various nations at tier 5, 6, or 7 that are substantially more viable and, honestly, more affordable to the vast majority of the player base. Lord knows that I've kind of stopped waiting for the tier 9 premium of the month, just because I've gotten to the point where if I'm going to get a premium ship, I'm going to have to pick and choose what I'm actually getting, because I cannot afford to be spending all of that on ships, on top of the fact that there is just way too much going on in regards to the actual game itself. There's not enough actual, or I should say, you've got all of the loot boxes that are being put out with early access ships, and you can either get those or you can get some of the newfangled premium tier 9s and 10s. It's just, there's so much going on, and I've got to say, some of these are very obvious and dramatic cash grabs on the part of Wargaming, and it's showing, and it's annoying as hell. I mean, Lord knows, me personally, I consider myself a collector of the game ships, and some of the historical ships even, and I'm not able to keep my collection going, among other things, just because the sheer expense is getting to be ludicrous, if I do say so. On top of the fact that, again, there are mid-tiers, tier 7, tier 6, tier 5, that are just being thoroughly ignored, avoided, whatever, that could very much make a difference in the game, and nobody's doing anything with them by a lot of appearances. They're it seems like Wargaming is more intent on focusing on ships that never even existed, like the Russian battleship line, which granted we did need a new ship line to kind of switch things up, but it's still just that they're more focused on putting out new ships that never even existed and not actually doing anything to actually really improve the overall gameplay in some respects. And that's where things kind of come around to their focus on the higher tiers, because one of the things that they're concerned about doing is keeping some of the existing player base and also luring in new players. The problem is you can't lure in new players with only high tiers, because where are those new players going to be? They're going to be at the lower tiers, where they might benefit more from a tier 4 or tier 5 premium as opposed to a tier 9. On top of the fact that you're not dropping a new player into tier 8, 9, or 10 matches where they have no real idea of what's actually going on, and basically making their teams suffer for it. So there are a lot of different ways that I think the premium ships, especially for the tier 9s, could be presented, I guess you could say. And of course there are also the regards in which some of these ships at the high tiers, especially the ones that are coming out in the armory for, say, coal or steel, they are so grindy in regards to just obtaining the resources in most cases that it's almost as though they're unobtainable. You can't really get them without spending every day in game, and even then, at best, sometimes you're only going to make a few thousand coal headway per day. And Lord help you if you're in a clan that does not actively participate in clan battles, and ranked battles are just too... That's the other thing with the focus on high tiers too, and I'll come back to that, is ranked battles at the high tiers. It's ridiculous. There's too much focus on the high tiers, and it is, I think it can, will, and does negatively affect the game, especially in regards to its appeal for new and incoming players, because they feel like they are being kept out of an exclusive club or whatever that is only obtainable by the players who have been playing the game since forever, or that they are basically pushed into trying to get to the high tiers as quickly as possible and basically neglect the low tiers. Something that also seems to be driven by all of the early access ships that are coming out lately. I mean, I think it's been, since maybe about this time last year when they first came out with the French battleships. I think those were the first ships that they actually put out in early access. And it's just... the way they've done it is so sideways, I guess you could say. I mean, I can understand maybe getting early access to a lower tier ship, maybe, but what happened to actually grinding the tech lines like we used to do? I mean, we have basically no way of... I mean, now you can play the game, you can buy your premium early access crates, and now suddenly you don't have to do anything to actually grind out any of the tech line. You can basically jump straight to tier 8. And I personally, as somebody who's been playing the game from the beginning, I think that is wrong. Because, again, say you've got a new player who comes along and, I can get an early access to a tier 8 ship. My best advancement right now is a tier 4 or tier 5, or maybe even a tier 3, but I can get early access to a tier 8 if I spend $100 and some odd on these loot crates. And suddenly, hey, guess what? I'm at tier 8 in a new tech line, and why am I not doing so well? It's because you don't understand the ship. You don't understand the tier. You haven't had the experience with the gameplay to be viable at the high tiers. So it's just one of those things where I seriously think Wargaming could really use to just kind of power back a little bit. Give the players, or not necessarily giving the players isn't quite the word I'm looking for. Kind of put it back to where things used to be, where players have to grind it through. Now, if you have, say, the free experience in your port to grind through an entire tech line, all power to you. You're an experienced player already. But if you're a player who's just starting the game, you should not be able to make that jump right now and basically become a detriment to your team because you have no idea what you're doing with any of your ships. The roles for the ships even change so dramatically in some regards from even just tier 3, between tier 3 and tier 8, that you really do need that time to develop the experience and kind of reacclimate yourself to where the different tiers have their set roles. It's just a big... It just seems like it's more of a drawback to have some of these early access ships, especially all the way up to the higher tiers. Tier 8 being, of course, the highest access that you can get, but even so, just having that push is, I think, detrimental to the game. That being said, with everything that is in-game currently focused at high tiers, I can understand why players are wanting to make these pushes and have these early access ships. Because some of the events that have been going on, they have substantially greater rewards for high tiers than they do at low tiers. So there's a benefit to the events for having these high tier ships, even if you don't really perform well. On tier 10, you currently have the ranked battles. The previous rounds, I believe, were tier 9 and tier 10. You've got you've got these players who want to try and get to tier 9 or tier 10 as quickly as they can so that they can get into ranked or clan battles. You've got the whole issue with some of the other things that have been going on. Again, just the regular events that are going on. You get substantially better rewards. I think Wargaming would do very well to kind of decrease the reward gap between the tier 10 and the first tier that is capable of taking part in some of these events, so that it's not as drastic, where players can actually make headway if they are in some of the lower tier ships at tier 4 or tier 5. Yes, the higher tiers are still incentivized, but it's not as dramatic as it is in the current game setup. For that matter, again, looking at the ranked battles, and the clan battles, everything is at tier 9, 10, or tier 8 in the current setup. And again, this is something that, these are things that you are pushing players to be able to access and providing access to players for, but at the same time, you've got that tier bracket, you've got that tier bar that just makes them inaccessible to your average player who's starting off and wanting to just get into things. And this is where some of the suggestions that I have for Wargaming start coming into play, because I think Wargaming could do things very, very differently and in ways that would benefit the game very heavily. For example, I think Wargaming could actually introduce variable level clan battles, or variable level, or things like that. I think Wargaming would do well to introduce, say, a low tier ranked, not ranked sprint, mind you, a proper ranked season at the lower tiers, where newer players can actually get involved and take part. And that's just one of multiple possible solutions. The other thing is for even just scenarios, the low tier gameplay. You have very few low tier scenarios that players just that they're either non-existent or they're in this especially once the CV reworks and aircraft reworks mechanics actually make their way back into some of the scenarios, where these ships just... these scenarios are just in this inordinately long cycle that by the time they get to something decent, or by the time they get to something that's semi-low tier, it's... or something that they even think that they might stand a chance of participating in, it's been 1 or 2 months, and they just don't want to wait that long to be able to play in a more lucrative, viable gameplay scenario. So there's that to consider, and now I actually get into what I was saying about some of my possibilities. Is when you're looking at your scenarios, it would be nice to have the option of having not just, say, one scenario a week, but instead split it up by your tiers, where the scenarios, you have access to a tier 6, a tier 7, and as more developed or come out, a tier 8 even, all at once a week, where you've got a weekly scenario for those tiers instead of being stuck with the scenario of the week, which may or may not be the greatest in the world, or the one that some players even want to engage in. On top of that, it would also give players the advantage of choosing which tier they wish to operate at, be it tier 6, tier 7, or tier 8, instead of being basically shoved in to a scenario that they may or may not want to take part in, and or at a lower tier than they want to take part in, and otherwise just kind of sit there twiddling their thumbs, waiting for the next one to come around. Also with the simple fact that, well, I guess my thoughts are kind of getting away from me here for a minute, so give me a second to resituate my brain, if you will. But I just think it would give players a lot more options if you have... It would also give lower tier players access to some of these scenarios instead of just having to wait for something that is higher tier to be cleared away from the queue. This also opens up opportunities for Wargaming to develop more scenarios, because suddenly your rotation cycle is not so extensive that it's 3-4 months before any of, or like 2 months or so before any of the scenarios even come back around in the cycle. Instead, your cycle is what's next in line for that tier for the week. If you only have... Now, granted, for right now, if, say, we only have 2 tier 8 scenarios, you cycle between those 2 each week, or maybe provide an extended duration on the turnaround for them. As far as the tier 7s, I know we've got at least 2 or 3 of them, so, I mean, they could have a nice weekly turnaround. And tier 6s, well, same there. So I do think it would be nice to have a variable, like, weekly scenarios available by tier. I also think it would be nice for Wargaming to try and develop some lower tier operations for lower tier players so that they can actually get into the enjoyment of the operation gameplay as well. Because right now they have to push up. They feel like they have to push up to tier 6. Granted, that's not a major jump, but it is still a jump or a grind depending on your playstyle or even just play availability. And it's just... It would give them more options, and it would also create an environment where they can actually earn better rewards to advance themselves without having to go into, say, random battles, which right now I know a lot of players are kind of put off on because of the sheer number of aircraft carriers that are flooding the matchmaker. So it would give them an opportunity to get away from aircraft carriers, possibly for a little bit, and just be able to play without also having to mess with random battles and still have decent rewards. Something else that I think could be done is consecutive ranked seasons, where you've got a season go. If you have a or not consecutive, contemporary ranked seasons, where you've got, say, 2 different ranked seasons running at the same time. Say you've got one that's higher tier for the high tier players so that they can still grab some enjoyment from it, but say maybe one at lower tier, like say you could have a tier 5, tier 7, or a tier 9 ranked season running consecutively or as contemporaries. And this provides a spread where players can choose where they want to dial in their experience for ranked battles and work with that. And of course, the lower tier ranked sessions could also have minimized rewards, of course, because you do still want to incentivize the higher tiers somewhat by giving better rewards. But say maybe you can still earn a little bit of coal or steel from like the tier 7 rank progression, and maybe even offer a little bit for the extreme end of the tier 5 progression. And I'm not talking like ranked sprints either. I'm talking full-on ranked seasons. And that's something that I firmly believe could benefit the gameplay. I mean, hell, they could even maybe introduce a tier 4 or a tier 3 ranked season with coal as the reward. And I'm sure there are lower tier players who would be more than willing to get behind that. On top of the fact that I'm sure there are a number of players who routinely engage in seal clubbing who wouldn't exactly mind going in and blapping new players as well. Not that that's something that I would encourage, mind you, but, you know, I'm going to throw it out there because where it exists, it would definitely happen. But at least it would give the lower players a possible chance of engaging in some of these, right now, exclusively high-tier occurrences. And I think it would definitely help rather than hinder the game. Something else that I think could benefit the game very highly, again, is doing the same with clan battles. Where the clan battles, if you have a clan that does not actively engage in clan battles or whatever, granted, okay, if you do not have a clan that actively engages in clan battles, this may or may not change anything. But if you have, say, lower tier players who want to engage in clan battles, instead of having to worry about having a tier 10 rental, maybe you've got a tier 5 clan battle that they can get into with, again, lower rewards, but still something to at least make them feel involved in the clan environment, where the lower tier clan battles have their own unique ranking system or whatever. And of course, yeah, you can still have your experienced players with their lower tier ships if they want to go in and just do something different for a change. Just jump into one of the lower tier clan matches instead of being stuck at tier 10. It also doesn't push the inexperienced players into tier 10. And yeah, again, it reduces the need to have the tier 10 rental ships or whatever for the players to engage in ranked or clan battles. So that there is that possibility there. And on top of this, having renewed interest in the lower tiers due to being able to access lower tier ranked battles or lower tier clan battles, this would also present interest from players, especially newer and incoming players, in the lower tier premium ships, which is potential earnings for Wargaming. Because suddenly, now you have premium ships that may or may not, that may be competitive at the lower tiers for ranked clan battles, whatever, that are suddenly viable options. They're not just changes to the random meta or maybe minor advantages in the scenarios. Maybe they can actually start becoming viable challenges, viable ships for actually engaging in the true competitive battle modes, instead of basically just sitting in the port and being something that's interesting to jump into every now and then just to earn a few extra credits or a little bit of extra experience points. So these are things that I could also see as benefiting Wargaming from both their profit standpoint by actually making some of these lower tier ships appealing for gameplay, and it would also give interest to newer players. It would draw them in, maybe even help retain them in some respects, and it would just give a whole new life to the game, I think. And these are things that I don't think would be all that difficult for Wargaming to actually implement. I mean, overall, there are definitely all kinds of things that Wargaming, I think, could definitely do to bring interest back into the game. Of course, there are other concerns that have been addressed, again, by Zoop, that, granted, I haven't noticed the economy so much because, granted, I'm a co-op primary player. I'm used to kind of having crappy rewards anyway. But the simple fact is there that the economy, that the in-game economy for credit earnings or EXP earnings could be refined a lot better. And I do think that there are a number of ships that just do not earn in quite the same regard as others. Lord knows I would love to see aircraft carriers, their economy still needs to be brought on par, at least somewhat, with some of the other ships, because their earnings for even a decent match still kind of suck, to be perfectly honest. If you're in a 100% dominant top of the team CV, that's one thing. You're probably still going to be making a profit no matter where you are. But it just doesn't seem like, in the experience I've had with CVs so far, even in the premium CVs I might add, that their earnings, despite supposedly being on the same level as battleship economy, just isn't quite there. Because again, where battleships also tend to earn a lot of their credits is in tanking shells and potential damage received. And this is something that aircraft carriers, good aircraft carriers, should never actually induce, is potential damage. Why? Because if they're in the middle of the fray, they're doing it wrong. So you've already got an inherent aspect of battleship economy that is being missed out on these aircraft carriers simply by the nature of the beast. CVs do need to have their own economy established and balanced properly, where they can actually earn and be lucrative in the proper sense without, and actually be appealing to the normal player, not just to the player who is your high-end Unicum 90 or 50 or whatever % win rate in random battles, because they're just utterly dominant. So the economy does need changes to just kind of make their presentation to ships, presentation to anything really, just be viable in regards to income for players in general. On top of the fact that there are numerous tier 10 ships where you can get into battle with them, and unless you're running a premium camo, you are not going to earn a profit at all for any level of gameplay. Just because the ship costs without a premium camo are just too high. So that is something else that I believe could definitely benefit gameplay very highly, is just making the economy more lucrative for average players. Because right now, the only players that it really truly rewards are the exceptional players, and that's not helpful to the gameplay at all, really. Something else that has been mentioned is just that some ships need to be properly rebalanced. Some of these tier 8, 9, 10 premiums that are coming out are just not properly balanced in the way that they should be. And they need to have a lot more testing going into them, and just to keep them yes, competitive, but not so overly powerful or broken that they are unhandleable. Something else that needs to be done is, again, I think, and this is a concern that has been brought up by numerous players and CCs, is that the the existing ships, the ships that were in game to start with, so we're talking the US tech line, the Japanese tech line, some of these ships just need help. They need something that makes them viable in game again, because they've just been power crept into basically anonymity by some of the other tech lines or whatever that have been introduced lately, and they just can't perform in the environment that has been handed to them. Shit, and I just ran aground. Yes, I am recording this live, as a matter of fact, just because I've got so much that I'm trying to talk about. It's just that there are so many different things that need to change, that need help. I've also heard rumors of some bugs that have been in game basically since inception that Wargaming has never ironed out and still needs to. Personally, I'm not aware of many, if any of them, but the simple fact remains that maybe there are, and there's just no motion on them, or never really has been, and it's having a detrimental effect on the game and some of the things that have just been in game from the start, that they just need help. They need assistance to actually be good again, be viable even, in some regards. So I suppose that kind of finishes off a lot of where all of this was going. I don't really think there's too much more than that. I mean, some of the issues that have already been discussed anyway are kind of very high notice anyway, I suppose. So there's just that little bit of, I guess I could say, change that, well, I can't even really call it a little bit. There's a lot of changes that need to be made to keep this game being viable. Now, granted, I am a player who has been in the game for, 3-4 years now. I've been playing the game, I think, since the open beta, maybe? I know I've got one of the beta tester badges in my actual patch rotation, so I know I've been involved in the beta testing somewhere. But again, I'm not 100% sure where. I've been in the game since before there were any German ships in the game. So there is that to be had. And personally, I do still enjoy the game very highly. But there are definitely things that need to be done to just bring the game back to where it's not ultra high tier gimmicky gameplay. I remember back in when I was first starting to play the game, we had the Arpeggio collaboration with the Congo class battleships, Myokos, where you could actually earn these ships by playing at the lower tiers very easily. And it would be nice to see some of those events coming back, where you don't have super high tier premium ships coming out where they're only available for events or steel or whatever, and it would make the gameplay better having some of these sort of special events come back and incentivize low tier gameplay again, and get nice rewards and maybe low tier ships for it. Another thing that I think would provide a decent benefit to the game is reduce some of the, and this is something that was mentioned by Zoop, and it's definitely something that's been on my mind for a while now, is basically kind of reduce some of the paywalling. I definitely think that there are a number of the steel ships that could be brought down in cost to make them more effective to some of the players who don't get into clan battles easily or regularly and have a minimal a minimum influence in ranked battles. I mean, coal is one thing. That's something that is readily available through gameplay, but I still think that it's something that could be, I guess, devalued just a little bit, where some of these ships, I mean, yeah, okay, the Tier 9 Georgia, that one probably should be a little bit higher in cost for coal and whatnot, but at the same time, I'm looking at my progression and say 228,000 coal and thinking, I really don't want to try and grind out that much coal, especially when I've got, say, in my rewards containers or whatnot, something that are far more valuable, like, say, consumables or signals that I can get that actually assist my gameplay instead of giving me a resource that's going to sit in my port for Lord knows how long until I have enough for a new ship. And again, that's not even talking about steel, which right now it is literally basically an elite resource. You only get it if you are a player who, or even really you only get enough of it if you are a player who actively engages in the Tier 10 clan battles or the Tier 10 ranked battles, where a lot of players just don't really either have the viability to get into them, the experience to get into them and perform well, or even just the desire to get into the, dare I say, more toxic ranked or competitive environment. So that there are definitely some things that I think Wargaming could do, and even just in regards to the armory availability and whatnot, that would actually help incentivize some of the gameplay and game development. I mean, I'm looking at the Georgia here. I just recently got my 25% discount reset, and I've only got 13,800 coal right now. It's going to take me forever to grind that coal out, among other things. And even with the discount, that's going to take my cost down to what, 170,000 at best for the Georgia if I want it. And this is provided that they don't remove it from the armory before I even get that coal together. And I'm sorry to say, my finances right now, I cannot afford to get any of the... I personally cannot afford to get any more of the advanced access crates. I cannot afford to get any of these premium ships direct from the premium shop, especially when each and every single one of them lately seems like they're Tier 8, Tier 9, Tier 10 at even the lowest cost, like $50 a pop. So yeah, I'm literally at the point where if I want a premium ship, I'm up the creek without a paddle, because all of the ships that are coming out are literally above where I can afford to go for them. And I'm reasonably sure that there is a large portion of the player base that is starting to feel the same way, unless they happen to be your rich kid moneybags who only has money to spend on warships and doesn't have any other expenses in life elsewhere. I mean, my finances are where I am, where I cannot actually even budget to try and get access to some of these ships, especially when you've got like 2 or 3 of them that are coming out in very rapid succession. Hell, I'm lucky to have enough available to actually pay off my gas bills every month, on top of everything else that I have due on various things. So it's kind of becoming grating having all of these ships that there's basically no access to, or you're basically having to choose this one or this one because, well, affordability. And if I'm having trouble affording these higher tier ships, I guarantee every other player is. And I'm sure that there are a lot of newer players who are coming into the game who are like, I'm not going to spend $120 on a ship that's at high tier that I may or may not know how to play. I'd rather spend, say, $10, $20 on a ship at lower tier where I'm currently comfortable, and, you know, these ships are actually, affordable. So it would be interesting to see Wargaming kind of present, I guess I could say, unique sales of some of these lower tier ships, and actually have events or whatever going on that actually make these ships competitive or viable and seem like a actual presentable competitive option compared to the Techline ships, instead of just something that's premium and pretty sitting in their port. Anyway, I suppose that's kind of my 2 cents on the issue. It does, and I suppose I did kind of get a lot long-winded on it, but I did kind of want to state the problems as have been addressed by not just myself now, but a number of other community contributors, and also some of the solutions that I could see as possibilities, whether or not any of you agree with them. And I do think that Wargaming would do very well to implement some of these changes that I've at least thought up, just to help out the gameplay, incentivize low tiers, and just bring in new players and retain new players instead of just trying to paywall all of them into the higher tiers and drag them in where suddenly they may not perform well and quit the game because suddenly everything's too hard and heavy for them. So I think some of these suggestions would actually help out the game a lot more than more high-tier premium ships that not everybody may be able to afford. And actually create a demand for some of the lower tier ships, which again would help with Wargaming's profit margins. On that note, I suppose I shall go ahead and let you all go. I hope you all take care. Please do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I hope that what I've talked about here gives everybody a lot to think about, and maybe, who knows, Wargaming will stumble across it and consider some of my ideas as being at least marginally valid. Take care. Happy hunting, folks. Catch you next time.